Good morning. I'm Louise Shelley, and I am the director of the Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Center and a professor at the Shah School of Policy and Government. But what is important for this discussion is that we do the data entry and for the US State Department grant on the statistical annex on terrorism. It is a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jennifer Santiago Oreta, who is a Fulbright scholar with us at the present time. When she first wrote us and asked if we would be interested in hosting her at TraCCC, I was absolutely delighted because she is a distinguished specialist, as I'll explain to you in a minute. And also in our work, we do not know enough about terrorism in the Philippines, the problems of instability there and in the region. So I am delighted to have her with us. She is an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science and director of the Ateneo Initiative for Southeast Asian Studies at the Ateneo de Manila University, which is one of the top universities in the Philippines. She's currently a US-ASEAN scholar under the Fulbright program with us at TraCCC. She's had a very distinguished career as a practitioner. She was appointed as Assistant Secretary for Policy in the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process of the Filipino government. And OPAPP is the agency under the Office of the President that is specifically mandated to facilitate political negotiations with armed groups and supervise the implementation of peace agreements. I can go on. There's much more about her bio on our invitation to you. I also want to acknowledge Al Fuertes, who is a member of TraCCC and a Filipino specialist on peace and peacemaking, who is joining us today and has been so helpful in hosting Professor Oreta while she's here, and they are known each other for a long time. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Professor Oreta, and I'm thrilled to see so many of us online for this event today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Louise. And I'm very delighted to be here today to present to you a short discussion about the political violence and terrorism in Southeast Asia. Now, the topic is quite broad. As much as I want to be comprehensive in my discussion, what I will do is I will just go over some of the data, and then maybe we can explore more of them during the question and answer. So I'm sharing my screen. Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, let me see. Wait, I need to. Sorry for okay, there. So this is the outline that I want to discuss for today. So I will begin very quickly with the discussion about the Southeast Asian context, and then dive deep into the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia, and then what are the challenges in managing the political violence in the region, and then discussion about moving forward. Now, as you know, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, basically has 10 member countries. East Timor is not yet part of ASEAN, but the Southeast Asian region has 11 states. ASEAN was created more than 50 years ago in order to manage the interstate conflict, and it is actually based on the fundamental principles of non-interference, consultation, and consensus. Now, Southeast Asia is divided in what we call the mainland and the islands, or the insular and the peninsular. And this invisible divide has actually implications on how the region has responded to security challenges, for example, in the South China Sea and even in the Rakhine State. No? So the region is also very diverse. No? So the culture, tradition, and religion of peoples, no? The history of colonization of the various states, no? And eventually the post-colonial state formation actually are very different from each other. So in other words, while we talk about Southeast Asia, it's really very difficult to pinpoint that it is, a singular region. Now, what are the common features of Southeast Asia? No? Currently, the contemporary political structure of Southeast Asia and many of the problems, no, in the region can be traced from the colonial past. No? For example, racial divisions, no, in Indonesia and Malaysia are actually based or brought about by the social conflicts, no, during the colonial period. The political development also in Southeast Asia is intimately bound, no? And cannot be separated from the prevailing economic circumstances. No? So a lot of the issues of Southeast Asia are managed, no, within the state itself. No? And we cannot divorce, no, the issue of key economic actors, no, and the political elites. No? The military remained to be a major player in state formation and nation building in Southeast Asia. No? So a lot of the countries have experienced military coup d'etat and authoritarianism in the long history, no, of its state formation. No? And just a mention here that a lot of the military institution or challenge of this military institution is the fact that a lot of them remain to be outdated, no? Or the security institutions remain to be outdated, and the key issue of accountability to the public, no, is still a challenge, no, with regard to security institutions. Now, this is the last slide that I want to share when it comes to vis-a-vis the contextualization. You'll see how eclectic we are. No? So we are very diverse in terms of our political system, in terms of our structure of government, and even the recent changes, the recent political changes, or history of political change. The latest of which would be the coup d'etat in Myanmar that happened early this year. Now, with that said, let's now dive deep on the issue of political violence. And I'd like to start with the most complicated, my country, the Philippines. No? So this is my cluster, my attempt at clustering. No? For purposes of discussion, I clustered the different armed threat groups in the Philippines into 4. No? But the reality is that these organizations on the ground, no, are crosshairs with each other. No? The operational battle space of this organization are really the same. No? So there is a lot of cross-pollination of grievance that happened on the ground. No? So the first cluster would be the armed rebel group. No? So and it's further subdivided between the separatists and the communists. No? You'll see here a lot of what we call the alphabet soup of armed threat groups in the country. No? And then the second cluster would be the terror organization. I'm sure you're familiar with the Abu Sayyaf group, but there are also a lot of other organizations that are considered as terrorists in the Philippines. And then you have the private armed groups, no, managed by a lot of politicians and political families and criminal syndicates. No? And as I've said earlier, no, while they are clustered separately in this slide, the reality is on the ground, there is a lot of cross-pollination, no, within these organizations. Now here you will see how complicated it is. No? We begin with the Bangsamoro Separatists. No? So it started with the Mindanao independence movement, which is non-violent. No? It's a non-violent organization, but because of the repression that happened during the time of the Marcos administration, the Mnlf, no, was created in the 1970s. No? Eventually, the government will sign peace agreements with the Mnlf, but every time that there is a peace agreement, there is a separate group that would emerge. No? The first of which would be the MILF. No? The MILF separated from the mainstream MILF in 1978 after the MNLF decided to sign a peace agreement with the government in 1976. No? And eventually, the BIFF, no, the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighter, also separated from the MILF when the MILF started talking peace, no, with the government. No? Now here you also have the Mnlf group, no, that emerged in 2013 when the organization felt that it is being left out in the peace process with the MILF. No, the Abu Sayyaf group, on the other hand, emerged in 1991, created by the Afghan alumni, no, John Jalani, no, and when John Jalani was killed, no, eventually the Abu Sayyaf splintered into two major groups, no, the Abu Sayyaf Basilan, led by the late Isnulon Hapilon, who was part of the Marawi siege or was recognized by the alliance that initiated the Marawi siege as the emir, and then the Abu Sayyaf Sulu, led by Radullah Sahiron. No? Now, I just want to mention that there's also a subgroup called Ajang Ajang. No? Ajang Ajang is composed of the orphans, no, of the original Abu Sayyaf of 1991. No? And they are also skilled, no, in bomb making and deliberately targeting or attacking the security forces. No? Now, down here, you have the communists. No? The mainstream would be the Communist Party of the Philippines, CPP, New People's Army. And it was created in 1969. And there are two splinter groups. You have the Cordillera People's Liberation Army and the Revolutionary Proletariat Army, Alex Bungayao Brigade. Now, these two groups have signed a ceasefire agreement already with the government. No? 1986 was the CPLA and 2001 was the RPA. But you'll notice that there are again two splinter groups, no, that were created, no, under the CPLA and under the RPA-ABB. The yellow highlighted name here is the group that honors the ceasefire agreement and moves forward with the peace process. No? Now take note that the red fonts, no, the red fonts that I am showing here basically are the organizations that are considered by the government as terror organizations. And these are the major groups that have reported or that were, no, allegedly, no, pledge allegiance to the ISIS in 2016. No, in 2016, intelligence reports says that there are actually in 2018 there are 23 organizations that have pledged allegiance to ISIS. Majority of these organizations or the leaders of this organization have already been neutralized by the security forces. So which means either they are killed in battle or they are arrested. No? But the organization remains. No, their organization remains. So some key observations: the Muslims is a political minority in the Philippines. No, and their motivation for fighting, no, or initiating violence is basically what I call gut issues or survival issues. No, so and I divided it into four. No, political the demand for political inclusion, the complaint about the limited economic opportunities, especially in the southern part of the Philippines, socio-cultural discrimination against the Muslims, and a lot of the historical wrongs. No? The historical wrongs was brought about by our colonial past. No? So under the American administration, in order to address or in order to solve the problem of communism in the northern part of the country, they distributed lands to the leaders of the communists, no? But the lands that the colonial government distributed were taken from the Muslim families, no? So this actually contributed a lot to the perception of relative deprivation and discrimination and persecution, no, by the Muslim communities, no? So there are two more complicating factors, no? And the complicating factors would be the relationship, no, of the horizontal relationship of these organizations. No? You'll see here in the Bangsamoro, I put a broken line that links together the Mnlf, the MILF, and the Abu Sayyaf. No? So they are divided in terms of organization, but the reality is that they are connected, no, intimately by family connection, no, by marriage, by blood, no. But some of them are also fighting each other, no, under what we call the rido, no, or the clan conflict. So the Bangsamoro, in general, this organization, they don't fight each other, they don't kill each other, they are operating parallel with each other, no, but they are not working together, no. And that's the significance of the Marawi, if I may just mention, of 2017. The Marawi siege brought together these organizations that have not been working together for the past several decades. No? Communist, on the other hand, is different. No? So these are the two separate groups or the splinter groups that I mentioned earlier. The uniqueness of the communists is that they kill each other. No? With the Bangsamoro, they are operating parallel with each other. But with the communists, especially the Communist Party of the Philippines, they regard the splinter groups, no, or the ones that break away from the mainstream as anti-revolutionary, and therefore they must be punished. So there are a lot of assassinations and targeted killings that happen within these three organizations. Now, the second complicating factor would be the foreign fighters. No, here you will see the route taken by foreign fighters, no, in joining the Marawi siege. No, so the staging point was Sandakan, Indonesia, went to Tawi-Tawi, Sulu, Zamboanga, and eventually joined the Marawi siege in 2017. And it happened because of the weak border management, no, in the Sulu Triangle. No, also there is ease of connection, no, because of the ethno-national connection of language, religion, and customs of the groups, no, here in the groups in Indonesia and the groups in the Philippines, and the dysfunctional governance in southern Mindanao. Now let's go to Malaysia and Indonesia. Now, this is my attempt at summarizing the major or the important events that happened. No? Now, take note that the development of JI, no, in both Indonesia and Malaysia are intimately connected. No? So we begin with Darul Islam in Indonesia, which actually was an anti-colonial organization, but when they were granted independence, it became an anti-secular, no, anti-Sukarno, anti-Suharto organization. So when the Suharto organization began the crackdown in 1985, a lot of the leaders of Darul Islam went into hiding. Bashir and Sungkar, no, key leaders of DI, went to Malaysia and relocated the operations in Malaysia. No? And they found resonance with a lot of the anti-colonial forces, the Malay anti-colonial forces and revolutionary forces in Malaysia. No? In 1993, JI Malaysia was created. No? They had a lot of religious, economic, and education activities, and they also had a lot of training. No? So those being trained as mujahideen were sent either in Afghanistan or in southern Philippines. No, when they are sent in the Philippines, they are assured that they will be doing actual battle, no, actual engagement with security forces. No, in 1995, KMM Malaysia was created by the Afghan alumni. No, now take note that I want to mention here that a lot of these Malaysian Afghan alumni were also involved in training the Mnlf and the Abu Sayyaf group in the Philippines during this time. No? In fact, Zulkifli Marwan was living in the Philippines and was training the breakaway group, no, the BIFF, no, and he was killed in a law enforcement operation in the Philippines in 2015. Dr. Mahmoud Ahmad, no, also a Malaysian Afghan alumni, actually facilitated the creation of the Dawla Alliance that initiated the Marawi siege, no, in 2017. He eventually was killed also in the siege. No? Now, I also want to mention that as early as 1999 and 2000, there were already 3 meetings that happened participated by representatives from Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, and Myanmar, and they were exploring, no, the creation of an Islamic Caliphate, no, as early as 1999. No, there were no concrete partnerships that was forged. There's also no concrete plan, but as early as 1999, that idea is already there. Now, Bali bombing in 2002 and the Aceh tsunami in 2004 actually crippled, no, the JI, no, and the vacuum that was created, no, by these incidents, no, was used by the IS, no, the IS filled the gap, no, the IS filled the gap, no, and in 2014 Bashir actually decided to swear allegiance to ISIS. So he divided the group, no, the JAT, between those that are loyal to JI and Al-Qaeda, and then he created the group, the JAD, no, which became the umbrella organization of all those groups that are sympathetic with ISIS, no, and it was actually the JAD that coordinated the bombings in 2018 in Surabaya, no. In Malaysia, the MIT, no, led by Santoso, also swear allegiance, no, to IS in 2014, and as I've said, no, in the Philippines in 2016, several organizations in the Philippines also did swear allegiance. No? Some observations. No? In both Indonesia and Malaysia, these countries have dominant Muslim population, and therefore the motivation for political violence is fundamentally different with that of the Philippines. No? So in the Philippines, the grievance, as I've said, are gut issues or survival issues. But in Indonesia and Malaysia, the main motivation would be anti-secular, anti-West, and the desire to create an Islamic state. The recruitment, contemporary recruitment in Indonesia is family focused. No? As I've said, the Surabaya bombing, no? These are 3 coordinated, no, bombings that happened, no, in Surabaya. It was initiated by middle-class families. No? In Malaysia, contemporary recruitment is focused on individuals using social media as the main vehicle, no, the main platform, no, to tap, no, previously untapped demographics. No, now the interesting part here is that the recruits are middle class, educated, and they do not have militant past. No, now for both Indonesia and Malaysia, no, the approach of the JI and eventually the IS, no, in terms of recruiting, no, using closely ties, no, makes it difficult for this organization to evolve into a movement with mass appeal. No, in fact, a lot of studies would argue that there is no overt group, no, particularly in Malaysia, that have declared allegiance with ISIS. Now, what are the challenges, no, in managing political violence in Southeast Asia? Number one, we do not have a common threat assessment. No, we do not have, as a region, we do not have a common threat assessment. The reality is that all states within the Southeast Asian nation, or the ASEAN, no, rather, continue to place the most importance on internal stability and security, and they want to manage it themselves. No, we want to manage it ourselves. No. And this is more because the interstate suspicion and rivalries, no, among the ASEAN member states have not been fully eradicated by the 50+ years, no, of cooperation among the countries. No. The ASEAN member states also treat democracy and the principles of democracy as a norm rather than a concrete type of political system. So, and unfortunately, there is still the tension of promoting democracy and the principle of non-interference, no, in the region. No. And ASEAN is still an intergovernmental organization. It has not reached the level of like the European Union. No? So we have a lot of agreements amongst the members of ASEAN, but these agreements have no legal, no, authority. No? They are not legally binding. So what are the ways forward? No? I'm down to my last 2 slides. No? First, for countries with internal security concerns like the Philippines and to a large extent Myanmar also, no, who's also suffering with a lot of ethnic armed groups. No? Central in addressing the political violence is still good governance, still delivery of basic services, and opening up of economic opportunities for people, especially in conflict-affected areas. No? So given that a lot the armed groups, no, are feeding on the legitimate grievance of the people, addressing them remains to be, addressing these issues remain to be key elements. No? And then lastly, in terms of the regional level, we need to have a common threat assessment, a common standard in political and legal mechanisms in dealing with terrorists, no? Terrorist individuals and groups. We need to have a standard, objective, and then identifiable indicators. And that's actually the heart of the research that I'm doing under the Fulbright US-ASEAN. No? the trilateral cooperation agreement between the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia is still within the Defense Department, no? And it has to be raised on the level of the executive, no? In order to facilitate what we call, quote unquote, whole of government cooperation between and among the three countries, no? And finally, there has to be more people-to-people engagement, no? Especially among the three countries, no? On matters of preventing and countering violent extremism or terrorist organizations. So with that, I end my discussion, 20 minutes, no? And I am ready to answer some of the queries and clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was a brilliant 20 minutes, and I learned so much. Please either raise your hand in the audience or put your questions in the Q&A box. And while we're waiting, because I just put a request in the chat box, let me ask a question. What do you think will be the impact on the situation in the ASEAN region of the ascendancy of the Taliban in Afghanistan? Is that going to have ripple effects in your region?
Maybe not on a regional level, but more on the individual country level. No, it may have an influence on Indonesia and Malaysia, as I've said, because the desire or the motivation, no, for political violence in these countries is more the altruistic, no, agenda of an Islamic state, no. But in countries like the Philippines and to some extent Myanmar, no, where we are still saddled with internal security, no, problems, no, of internal armed groups, I don't think that the ascendancy of Taliban will have a big effect, no, in the Philippines, South Thailand, as well as Myanmar. But maybe it has a more direct effect, no, on Indonesia and Malaysia.
Thank you. The questions are beginning to come in. Judy Dean asks, could you talk about your experience in the government negotiations with terrorists? What worked? In retrospect, what should have been done differently?
Well, I can go on for one whole day and even more talking about my experience in the government. There's a lot of hit and miss when you are negotiating with or trying to forge a political agreement. No, when we were formulating the agreement with the Mnlf, no, the More Islamic Liberation Front, we studied all the hits and misses that we have had with our experience with other organizations. And we thought that we are already learned, no? We already have figured it out, no? Only to find out that once we signed the peace agreement, there were still a lot of areas that we forgot, no? For example, no, and I'm talking more on the normalization or the DDR component because that's where I was involved immensely. No, when we signed an agreement with the Mnlf for the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, or the DDR agenda, we said that they will have to turn in their weapons, not surrender, but turn in their weapons, no? And our assumption is that one member, one weapon, no? We do know that each member has multiple weapons, but at least for the purpose of that agreement, we've agreed on a 1:1 ratio, no? And then now that it's being implemented, the Mnlf has distinguished the kinds of weapons, no, into organization-owned and individual-owned. No? In our negotiation, there was no discussion about a distinction between an organization and individual-owned. But now that it is being implemented and they are being asked to turn in their weapons, they have distinguished between organization-owned and individual-owned, and they will only turn in the organization-owned firearms and not the individual-owned, because according to them, that is what is covered by the agreement, because the agreement is between the government and the Mnlf. No, so there are these kinds of nuances that, as I've said, no, we thought that we have figured it out, no, but when we now go into the actual implementation, there are still a lot of details that need to be filtered out. That's just one example of the difficulty, no, between negotiation and translating it into actual implementation.
Okay, many more questions coming. Next one from Mahmoud Chengiz. I have two questions. Why do separatist groups in Bangsamoro prefer to lean towards ISIS? What makes it ISIS an attractive group to pledge allegiance to from those in the region? Do NPA and jihadist groups collaborate with each other? Are there any incidents showing this collaboration?
Wow, that's quite a lot of questions.
Yes.
The first, why is IS more attractive? I would say that it is not necessarily, it's really the branding, no? Again, in the Philippine context, no, it's more the branding that attracted them, no, with the IS. Take note that even before the IS started the beheadings, no, the public beheadings, Abu Sayyaf was already doing that. No, as early as 1991, when they started the kidnapping and fighting with the security forces, they were already decapitating, no, so members of the security forces. So, when ISIS went public, no, with a lot of these very gross, no, punishment, no, maybe it is part of the attraction, no, that made the Abu Sayyaf, no, identify more with IS, no. And also, as I've said earlier in the discussion, the JI suffered a lot of setbacks, no, especially in Indonesia and Malaysia, because of a lot of the draconian policies of the Malaysia and Indonesia. So there was a vacuum for some time, which was filled in by ISIS, no, Now, operational cooperation between the New People's Army and the JI or the jihadist in the areas, I would say more on a tactical level, no, and depends on the political situation. For example, we are entering election season, no? We are entering election season beginning October. So on the ground, there are a lot of tactical cooperation between the different organizations, whether they are criminal organization or private armed group or armed rebel group, no? Tactical cooperation so that they will not engage in what we call quote unquote friendly fire, no. So but in terms of strategic cooperation, there's no evidence, no, that the communists, no, and the jihadists are actually working together in the Philippines.
Thank you. Vladimir Semizhanov has a question. Have there been any efforts aimed at improving governance and providing more opportunities in the region? Were they successful? If not, what needs to be done to make efforts more successful in the future? And and I'll add one question, add to this, but go on with the beginning before we put too much on you.
No, in the case of the, I'm familiar with the Indonesia and the Philippines, no. In Indonesia, they are doing a lot of reforms, no, especially with the security forces, no, in the security sector, no, and the reforms are really meant to improve the condition and the relationship of the security forces with the people, no. In the case of the Philippines, we have because of the peace agreement that we've signed with the Mnlf, the government legislated what we call the Bangsamoro Organic Law, no, which is the political translation of the political agreement. And that agreement provides sufficient or ample autonomy, no, to the Bangsamoro area, no, to the Bangsamoro area. It's still ongoing. The organization or the autonomous region was just organized in 2018. The members of the parliament have been appointed by the president, and the first election should have happened in 2022, but they have petitioned the government to extend, no, and delay the extension to 2025, and I believe that it has been granted. So in other words, there has been efforts, no, but I think the major problem is that there is always a disjoint between the intention and the operations, no. So even if the national government desires, no, to improve the condition on the ground, it still ultimately depends on the capacity, no, of local government units, no, to deliver these changes, no, and the capacity and interest, no, if I may add, no, the capacity and interest of members of local government units, no, because again, I'm talking about the Philippines, in a lot of the areas in southern Philippines, members of the local government are also perceived by the local population. Some of the LGUs, or the local government units in southern Philippines, are perceived by the population as predatory, no, that they are using their position to advance their interest, no. So you have that kind of dilemma that you have on the national level. There are a lot of political reforms that are being pushed, but the actual implementation on the ground is really challenging. No? There's a lot of areas that need to be improved.
Thank you. I just wanted to build on that, which was the second part of the question I wanted to ask, which was about corruption. And you talk about predatory elites. Is corruption a mobilizing tool by some of the terrorist groups and anti-government forces as a way of mobilizing middle-class members and others of society?
For the Communist Party, yes, they are using the issue of corruption as a battle cry, no, or as a mobilizing agenda, no, particularly targeting the young students, idealistic, no, students, middle class, young professionals, no. But the issue of corruption, when it comes to jihadists, or the terror organization, let's put it this way, the corruption in southern Philippines is so endemic, no? So I'm not so sure anymore if it's still being used. It's like a given reality, no, already in the southern Philippines, no, and hence, no, the perception of predatory political elite, no, or oligarchy in the southern Philippines is a given, and it's not being utilized as much as the communists, no. For the communists, they are really utilizing it to the hilt, no. But for the jihadists, it's a given reality, no, in the southern part, no, and therefore, it is as I've said, no, it really becomes a major question, major challenge to initiate reforms, no, in a lot of these local government units.
Thank you for your very subtle answer. We have a question from Satidiran Sinapan. Interesting topic. I'm from Malaysia. How has the Malaysian government dealt with exchanging information with the Filipino government to overcome terrorism in the ASEAN region? And the second question from him is, the current Filipino president is known for his stern action against drug addicts. How does he deal with terrorists?
All right. First question, Malaysia and the Philippines. No, the ASEAN has actually signed a lot of agreements. No, within a lot of agreements amongst themselves. No, it's not just the Philippines and Malaysia and Indonesia. We do have, for example, in 2001, no, after the 9/11, we have already the joint declaration on counterterrorism. We already have in 2002 an agreement, no, to share intelligence, no, information with each other. No, but these are agreements, as I've said earlier. No, these are agreements. No, the translation of that into operational reality is still a challenge. No, remember, one of the major challenge, for example, between Malaysia and the Philippines is our dispute over Sabah. No, so the Malaysian government and the Philippine government are still in a sense in a tug of war, no, on who has the full control, or who should have control over Sabah. No, de facto it is under the management now of the Malaysian government, but the Philippine government has not given up, no, on its claim over Sabah. No, so this geopolitical reality between these two countries affect the intelligence sharing, no, the intelligence sharing of these two countries. So, for example, in I think in 2013 or 2014, no, there was a Lahad Datu attack, no, coming from the Philippines, no, attacking, no, Sabah, no, attacking Sabah. That actually created a lot of diplomatic, no, diplomatic role, no, between the Philippines and Malaysia. So this is an example of how the geopolitical relation of these countries, no, can affect the intelligence sharing, no, vis-a-vis terrorist organizations. Now, the second part of the question is, sorry, I forgot.
About the severity of response to the terrorists as opposed to drug addicts or drug dealers.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, my president is a very colorful president. I think that is I'm trying to be very diplomatic with the words that I use, no? But unfortunately, the way that the current administration frames the problem is that everything falls under what he calls narco-politics, no, or narco-terrorism, no. The term narco-terrorism has actually been popularized under this administration. So the argument is that regardless of the political, quote-unquote, political ideology of these groups, they are all involved, no, in narco politics, no, they're all involved in the drug trade, no, and hence they all fall under the heading, or they fall under the strategy of war on drugs, no, they all fall under the strategy of war on drugs. So that, in a sense, simplifies, no, the way that the administration manages, no, the different organizations. So everything now becomes under the war on drugs, no, and hence, no, because it is now under the war on drugs, there are quite a lot of questionable practices, no, that's being done by our own security forces, especially the police, no, because the police is the one that is in the front line, no, in the war on drugs, not so much with the military, but more with the police.
Thank you. Are there accusations against these terrorist groups of involvement in other criminal activity other than drugs?
Oh yes, no. In fact, the identity of the identity of the members of this organization changes, no, depending on the circumstance. No, our internal joke actually is that they have what we call the reversible jacket, no. So I am a member of Group A today, but I can become a member of Group B tomorrow, depending on, you know, how convenient it is for me, no. In fact, there's let me just cite an example, no. Alvin Santos, no. Alvin Santos is a former NPA, no, New People's Army. He's a former member of the communist, no, group, no, but he eventually surrendered to the government, and he became part of the paramilitary of the mayor in Cebu. No? So the mayor in Cebu created a paramilitary group to protect, no, the local government. So he, from being an outlaw, he became now a legal, no, member. No? But he's also training private armed groups in Mindanao and in northern Philippines, in Bulacan. No? So, and he's also involved in carnapping. No? He's also involved in gun running. No? But his public image or public facade is that he's a member of the paramilitary group of the local government, no, of Cebu. So you have that kind of multiple identity. He's just an example, no, but you have a lot of these individuals that actually have multiple identities, and as I've said, depending on the convenience and depending on the opportunity, they will adopt that identity.
Thank you. We have a question from Professor Martin, Phil Martin. Fascinating talk, Dr. Oreta. I would be interested to hear more about the nature of relations between local communities and the armed groups you discussed. Is there a variation in the nature of local governance arrangements, goods provisions? How might these civilian armed group relations affect the counterinsurgency strategies you mentioned?
In a lot of the particularly in the Abu Sayyaf areas, no, in the island provinces of Sulu and Basilan. Take note, I mentioned in one of the slides that there are two groups of Abu Sayyaf, no, the Basilan group and the Sulu group, no. The Basilan group, led by the late Hapilon, no, the one who became an emir of the Dawla Islamiyya, is actually more religious fundamentalist, no. But the other group, the group of Abu Sayyaf Sulu, are actually, I call it more enterprising. No? It's more involved in kidnap for ransom, no? And income generating or resource mobilization type of activities. No? These are two separate groups. They both carry the name Abu Sayyaf, but they operate separately. No? They operate separately. Now, the local communities, take note that while we talk about the Abu Sayyaf camps or the BIFF camps, these are communities, no? It's not like the military camp where it is really, you have clear barracks and you have clear encampment, but the camps in the local setting actually are communities. And as I've said, no, the operational space, no, operational battle space actually cross-pollinate, with each other. So in the Abu Sayyaf areas, no, every time that there is a kidnapping and every time that a ransom is paid, and of course these are anecdotal, no, every time that a ransom is paid, no, the economy of the community, no, is very fluid, no. In other words, the group actually shares the bounty, no, with their family, and because their family is a member of the community, there is a net effect, no, in the overall economy, no, of the local, no. So in other words, in terms of legitimacy, no, in terms of how the local community deals, no, with this terrorist organization, again, it is very transactional, no? It is very transactional, no? So we cannot talk about very lofty ideals of, peace and order, good governance principles, because on the ground, it is really a survival issue, no? It's really a survival issue. I don't know if I was able to answer the question, Dr. Shelley.
Phil, do you have anything else you wanted to ask? Just if you can unmute. All right, or write in the chat box. We have a question from Mark Davis, Pablo, Mandarang Pablo, saying, I do have a couple of questions. Is there a possibility that the Mnlf Abu Sayyaf JI connection will be revived in light of the resurgence of the Taliban in Afghanistan? How will this probably impact the Bangsamoro peace process? Currently, what are the enforcement mechanisms of the Philippine national government for DDR in the event that the MILF reneges on its commitment in the decommissioning process?
I didn't mention this in my presentation, but the Dawla Islamiyya that attacked Marawi is actually an alliance of the BIFF, the Maute group, no, and the Abu Sayyaf, no. Now, the BIFF, as I've mentioned earlier, is a breakaway group of the MILF. The Maute group, on the other hand, the patriarch, no, of the Maute is a family, no. The patriarch of the Maute family used to be a commander of the MILF, no, and they organized the Maute while, no, the father remains to be a member of the MILF. So in other words, under the noses of the MILF, the Maute group was organized, no. So there you have that kind of connection, no, within or amongst these groups, no. So is there a possibility that the MILF, Abu Sayyaf, and JI connection will be revived? I don't think that it will be the MILF because they are so invested already in the peace process. But I would think that it is really the BIFF, no, the breakaway group of the MILF, no, the Abu Sayyaf and the JI, no, and that connection remains, no. They are just under the surface. They are not overtly manifested because, as I've said earlier, they were a lot of the leaders were already neutralized by the security forces, but they are operating, you know, under the radar. No, they are operating under the radar, and my fear is that if the peace process in the Bangsamoro fails, no, or if it fails to deliver on the promise, no, of the peace process, then that's actually the opportunity that these organizations are waiting for in order to recruit the disgruntled members. No, so the reality of these armed groups is that they can wait. No, unlike administrations that have a time limit, no, that they have to step down from office, this armed organization can wait, no, until a more favorable situation is open to them, no, and they can actually initiate again another attack. No?
Thank you. We have a couple more questions. Phil Morton came back and said it sounds like there's not much local legitimacy for these organizations beyond instrumental transactions. And do you agree with that?
Yes and no. No. Yes, because as I've said, no, the communities benefit, no, from the very transactional relation, but because the members of the community are connected by blood or by marriage, no, that these are close-knit communities, no. In a sense, there is also a pressure, no, amongst members of the community to not really identify, but to be more maybe condoning with the actions of these organizations.
Okay, we have another question from Dr. Cengiz. The media is reporting a significant number of murder cases, but no attribution as to the perpetrators. The victims are activists, police, judges, and journalists. What could be the motives in these cases? Are they criminally motivated, or are they related to terrorism, or is it this hybrid that you're talking about?
Again, so I assume this is about the war on the killings in the Philippines, no?
Yes,
that's happening. When the war on drugs by the current administration was initiated, there were overlapping interests, no, that came into play. No, the first would be the state, no, and the what we would call the legitimate drug operations, no, or anti-drug operations of the state. No, so they target, you know, the identified drug lords, etc. So that's the first level. But it was also seen as an opportunity, no, by competing gangs, no, or competing drug syndicates to neutralize the opponent, no, and label it under the war on drugs. No, so in other words, they ride on, no, the agenda of the war on drugs. No, and then you have the third group. No, these are the corrupt officials, no, the corrupt police and members of the security forces who are also themselves involved in drugs, not but because of the seriousness, no, the perceived seriousness of the administration vis-a-vis the war on drugs, they now try to clean their, you know, their tracks. No, so all of these, no, are came into play, no, and hence you have a lot of reported killings, no, that happened, no, reported killings that happened, no, and then you also have, as I mentioned, also the communists, no, you have the communists that are liquidating, no, their former comrades because they have decided to break free, no, from the organization. In other words, what I'm saying is that there are now several layers of vigilante assassinations, no, or vigilante killings or targeted killings that's happening in the country. And to a large extent, they are being labeled, no, rightly or wrongly, no, by the media as part of the war on drugs. No? So that's why it's difficult to determine which of the deaths, no, are actually because of the legitimate drug enforcement operation of the state, and which of the killings or which of the deaths are actually brought about by the competing syndicates or the police cleaning up their ranks, or the security forces trying to neutralize some of the leaders of the communist organizations.
There's one part that you didn't answer, with when the victims are activists and journalists. Is this part of the war on drugs? Is this related to terrorism?
I don't think it is related to terrorism. I don't think it is related to terrorism. For the most part, as I've said earlier, election season is coming up. And a lot of the journalists and a lot of these activists are very open in their opposition and their critique against the government. So in the Philippines, the local election actually is very problematic, because the easiest way to win the election is to remove the opponent. So that's why there's a lot of targeted killings of political leaders. As for political activists, because they are, again, there are misplaced interest within the security forces. There are some members of the security forces who believe that the best way, and these are illegal, these are not condoned by the organization, not condoned by the institution. Let me make that very clear. But there are some members of the security forces who think that the best way and the best solution against the communist groups is to neutralize, especially the most vocal members, and hence they also engage, or they hire vigilante killers to neutralize these activists and journalists.
Thank you. All this is very complicated. It's all very relevant to what we work on and preparing this terrorism database. We have one more question. When you talked about some of the criminal activities that were going on, but you did not mention kidnapping, and some of that is associated with Abu Sayyaf. So do you categorize Abu Sayyaf more now as a criminal enterprise or as a terrorist group connected with ISIS? How do you do this categorization?
The Abu Sayyaf Sulu, as I've mentioned earlier, is more involved in the kidnapping. The group of Radulan Sahiron, they are more into kidnapping. But the Abu Sayyaf Basilan, on the other hand, is more religious in orientation. In fact, if you compare the number of kidnapped victims between the Basilan Abu Sayyaf and the Sulu Abu Sayyaf, you will have more victims in Sulu rather than in Basilan. Which actually, when I was still with the government, the discussion is that where does the Abu Sayyaf Basilan get their funds? If they are not so much involved in criminal activities or in kidnapping, where do they get their funds? And one possible answer would be they get it from because they swore allegiance to ISIS, or IS. Maybe they are getting some funds from international. But the Abu Sayyaf Sulu, actually, as I've said, was more enterprising. They are more involved in kidnapping, but less. In fact, Sahiron, there's no recorded evidence that he has sworn allegiance to IS, but his spokesperson, the spokesperson of Sahiron, did. But the leader of Abu Sayyaf Sulu himself, there's no evidence that he actually made a pledge of allegiance to ISIS. So the long answer short, the Abu Sayyaf Sulu is still into kidnapping. They are still into doing a lot of kidnap for ransom activities. But the Abu Sayyaf Basilan has been effectively crippled with the death of Hapilon and the cooperation between the provincial government and the military. When I did a study in 2019, the data provided by the governor of Basilan is that there are less than 40 no, members of Abu Sayyaf in Basilan because of the effective collaboration between the provincial government and the military. No, but we can't say the same with Sulu. No, we can't say the same in Sulu. No, the Sulu Abu Sayyaf remains to be very strong and still active in kidnapping, especially the well, we call them the small time kidnapping. No, the members of local government units, and they get, you know, they are required to pay 5,000 pesos or 10,000 pesos. That's just about $100 or $200, no, for them to be released the next day.
Thank you. We're out of time. We've been together for an hour. We've had visitors, I believe, in this discussion from literally all over the world. And so it's been a wonderful presentation. I have more questions, but you're still with us and I have a chance to pursue them. And very interested in the cyber and the telecommunications of these groups. We can discuss this more at another time. So thank you on behalf of GTAC, thank you on the behalf of TRAC, and thank you on behalf of the audience. And we appreciate your intelligence, your knowledge, and your subtlety in answering all of this. Thank you.
Thank you also for the opportunity. Good morning.